Hello everyone. Welcome to BYK Book Summary. I am Amin. Here we decode the inspiring journey, mental warfare, and empire building life lesson of the world's greatest legend. Today topics and their biggest secret are right on your screen. Let's dive in with my AI co-host.
So imagine it's 1848. A 12-year-old boy just steps off a boat into a completely new country.
Right, and he's wearing like torn, ragged clothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He barely speaks any English, or at least, he speaks with this incredibly thick Scottish brogue that no one can really understand. And his very first job in this totally unfamiliar world pays him $1.20 a week.
Just to survive.
Mhm.
$1.20.
Right. Now, flash forward 53 years to 1901. That exact same guy sells his company for $480 million.
Which is what, over $350 billion today?
Yeah, over $350 billion in today's money. It's just staggering. I mean, going from $1.20 a week to building an empire worth hundreds of billions. Today, we are jumping into a deep dive on the radical transformation of Andrew Carnegie.
Arguably, history's greatest industrialist.
For sure. We want to unpack the mindset, the mechanics, the sheer force of will that built that machine. And we're pulling today's insights from this really concise, powerful source script called Steel and Spirit, The Legacy of Andrew Carnegie, which was provided by BYK Book Summary.
It's really the ultimate study in extreme economic mobility, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this because I am just so excited about this narrative arc.
Well, what's truly fascinating here isn't just the amount of money he made. I mean, we often get blinded by those massive zeros, right?
Yeah, the $350 billion.
Exactly. But the true intellectual value is the blueprint. It's how he built the machine to generate that wealth. To understand the empire, you have to look at the specific fire that forged him.
Right, which means starting at the finish line in 1901 is useless. We have to go back to the beginning. So let's set the scene in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland. Because if we want to understand the driving force of this monumental figure, we have to look at what he was running from, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't this, aspirational pursuit of the American dream. It was strict survival.
Strict, brutal survival. So Carnegie's father was a handloom weaver. And in the early 19th century, that was a highly respected, skilled artisan profession.
Right, you owned your tools.
You owned your tools, you controlled your craft, you worked out of the bottom floor of your house, you set your own hours. It was a very solid, middle-class living.
But then the Industrial Revolution hits.
Right. It basically bared its teeth with the invention of steam-powered looms.
Well, let's break down that disruption because this wasn't just, a minor market shift. This was the total annihilation of a way of life.
Totally.
Because a steam-powered loom didn't just weave faster, it completely removed the need for the human artisan's physical skill.
Yeah, a factory of these machines could produce in a single day what an entire village of handloom weavers produced in a month, and at a fraction of the cost.
Wow. So almost overnight, the Carnegie family is just rendered economically obsolete?
Exactly. They went from being comfortable artisans to quite literally facing starvation. And you have to understand, this is the psychological bedrock of Andrew Carnegie's entire life.
Right.
Imagine being a young boy and you are watching your father, the provider for your family, get totally marginalized and financially broken. Not by, a bad decision or a natural disaster.
But by a piece of technology.
By a machine, yes.
That has to forge this really visceral realization in a kid's brain. You must either own the machine or you will be crushed by it. There's no in between.
It's adapt or die.
And honestly, it feels incredibly relevant when you look at technological displacement today. If you're listening to this and you work in an industry that's being impacted by AI,
Oh, absolutely. The parallels are definitely there.
people are feeling this existential dread of AI automating their jobs. And that is the exact same shock that Carnegie's father felt with the steam loom.
The underlying technology changes, sure, but the human experience of disruption, that is a constant. And the question I'd ask you, the listener, to consider is, how do you respond to that?
Right.
Do you fear being made obsolete? Or do you actively seek to understand the new tools? Because young Carnegie, when he arrives in Pittsburgh in 1848, he didn't have the luxury of sitting around philosophizing about it.
No, he was thrust right into the belly of the beast. He starts working in a Pittsburgh cotton factory as a bobbin boy.
Which is just a brutal job.
We're talking 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in an environment that is almost unimaginable today. Deafening noise, cotton dust coating your lungs, and just the sheer mind-numbing repetition of changing bobbins.
On the very machines that destroyed his father's livelihood.
Exactly. And that's what earned him that $1.20 a week. Talk about grit.
It's the definition of a baptism by fire. But the thing that separates Carnegie from the thousands of other immigrant kids working in those exact same mills is his refusal to let the factory floor become his entire universe.
Right, he didn't stay there long.
He viewed it as a temporary starting point, not the destination.
Which is a great transition into how he managed to climb out of that extreme poverty. He maneuvers his way into a job as a telegraph messenger boy, and then eventually he becomes a telegraph operator.
Right.
And the sources point out this really specific principle he had across every role. He became an absolute sponge.
The sponge strategy.
Right. He didn't just learn his job, he learned the entire system. But, I mean, how does a teenager delivering messages actually map out a whole industry?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the telegraph was basically the internet of the 1850s.
Okay, yeah.
So if you are the operator, you are the central node. All the critical data flows through you. But Carnegie didn't just read the messages and hand them off. He actually taught himself to translate Morse code by ear.
Wait, really? Just by listening to the clicks?
Just by listening. Most operators at the time, they had to let the machine punch holes in a paper tape, and then they'd read the tape visually to translate it.
Yeah.
But Carnegie learned to listen to the clicks and instantly know what the message was.
That is a massive efficiency upgrade. So he's processing data faster than anyone else in the room.
Faster, and he's retaining it all. He's listening to train schedules, major business transactions, raw material pricing, even troop movements.
So he's studying the flow of capital. He's learning the logistics.
Exactly. He memorized the locations of businesses, the key players in Pittsburgh, who was buying what for how much. Most people, they clock in, do their specific task, and clock out.
Right, they never look up.
They have no concept of the broader ecosystem. But Carnegie was treating this low-level wage job as a fully paid university education.
I love this. It's like, okay, imagine being hired to sweep the floors of a really high-end restaurant.
Right.
But instead of just pushing a broom, you use that time to memorize the chef's recipes. You study the supply chain of where they get the truffles and the beef. You watch how the manager diffuses difficult customers and handles the accounting at the end of the night.
That's the perfect analogy.
You're physically sweeping floors, but mentally, you're preparing to own the restaurant.
Yes. He was mapping the invisible architecture of the business. And even today, finding someone who wants that panoramic view is incredibly rare.
It really is. Most companies are so siloed, the marketing team has no idea how the supply chain works.
But that panoramic, systemic view is the absolute prerequisite for eventually dominating an industry. You can't manipulate a system if you don't know how the gears fit together.
Right. Okay, so he builds this massive internal database. He understands the system. But understanding the system is only half the battle. You also need people to help pull you up.
You need capital and you need opportunity.
Exactly. And in the 19th century, or really any era, if you have no money and you're at the bottom of the ladder, your knowledge is basically useless on its own, which leads us to the pivotal role of networking.
Right. Carnegie deliberately cultivated relationships with powerful people. He knew that capital and opportunity flow through networks of trust.
And his ultimate target was Thomas A. Scott.
Tom Scott, yeah. He was the superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad.
And the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 1850s, that wasn't just a train company. That was the largest, most complex private enterprise in the world.
It was massive. And Scott was a titan within it.
So why does a high-level executive like Scott take an interest in a teenage telegraph operator?
It goes right back to that systemic knowledge we were just talking about. When Scott needed a message sent or a problem solved, Carnegie didn't just blindly execute the task.
Because he understood the broader context.
Exactly. He could anticipate Scott's needs. He proved he could think at an executive level. He made himself totally indispensable. And in return, Scott made him his personal telegrapher and secretary.
And this leads to the ultimate pivot, the moment that changes everything. Tom Scott gives Carnegie an insider investment tip.
Yes, the Adams Express Company.
Right. He tells him to buy shares in this highly profitable freight business. But here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, go for it.
We talk endlessly about the myth of the self-made American industrialist, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps through sheer hard work. But his first major breakthrough was literally an insider tip from a powerful corporate boss who basically said, hey, Put your money here. Does that diminish his self-made myth? Or does it just prove the immense value of deliberately putting yourself in the room with powerful people?
It's a great question. I think it forces us to redefine what self-made actually means in business. It doesn't diminish his genius, it just highlights a different kind of genius.
The genius of positioning.
Exactly. Identifying the right mentor, earning their trust, and getting into a position to receive high-value information that is a core business skill. Plus, you have to remember, Scott gave him the tip, but he did not give him the money.
Oh, right. Carnegie had to figure out how to actually execute the trade.
And how he did that required an unbelievable amount of nerve.
Because to act on this tip, he needed $500. And he was making, what, roughly $4 a week at this point?
Yeah, barely anything.
He can't just walk into a bank and ask for a loan. So he goes to his mother, Margaret Carnegie, and he convinces her to mortgage their home to fund this stock purchase.
And if you are listening to this, I really want you to consider the gravity of that risk.
It's terrifying.
The Carnegie family had literally fled starvation in Scotland. They spent years in America scraping together just enough to finally own a small home. It was their only security.
And if this investment fails?
If the company goes under, the bank seizes the house.
Yeah.
He drags his family right back into the exact destitution they barely escaped.
So ask yourself if the opportunity presented itself. Would you have the courage to take a massive, terrifying risk like that? Borrowing from your own mother?
The psychological weight is just immense. But he trusted his understanding of the market, he trusted his mentor, and he took the leap.
And it pays off. That first dividend check arrives, and it fundamentally rewired his brain. It proved that money could work for him instead of him just trading physical labor for wages.
It was his gateway to capital.
But while Tom Scott provided that financial mentorship, there was another man who provided something perhaps even more valuable to a young Carnegie: intellectual capital.
Yes, Colonel James Anderson.
This brings us to Colonel Anderson's 400 books. And honestly, this is the emotional core of the whole deep dive for me.
Let's slow down the pace here because it really is a profound piece of his history. So, in the 1850s, books were not just mass-produced commodities like they are today.
Right, no paperbacks.
No, they were expensive, leather-bound luxury items. A working-class kid toiling in a factory could not afford a personal library.
But Colonel Anderson, who was this wealthy iron manufacturer in Pittsburgh, he had a private collection of 400 volumes.
And he made this highly unusual decision. Every Saturday, he opened his personal library to the working boys of the city.
400 books. I mean, think about that. Today, we have the entirety of human knowledge on our phones, and we barely use it for that. But to a boy who arrived with torn clothes and almost no English, breathing coal dust all week, a room with 400 books isn't just a hobby, it's an intellectual lifeline.
It was a portal to the universe. He was reading history, philosophy, economics, Macaulay, Charles Lamb, Robert Burns.
So this is where he built his vocabulary, his understanding of history.
This was the raw material that fed his sponge intellect.
Yeah.
But beyond the books, there was this emotional gravity to it. A wealthy, respected man treated these ragged, poor boys with dignity. He assumed they had minds that were actually worth cultivating.
The ROI, the return on investment of Colonel Anderson's kindness, is just staggering. Because decades later, when Carnegie is the richest man on the planet, he remembers that visceral feeling of being a poor kid getting free access to knowledge.
And his response was incredible.
He didn't just write a nice thank you note. He built over 2,500 public libraries across America and Britain.
2,500. It's the ultimate example of the multiplication of generosity.
Yeah, scaling an idea.
One man opens a small room on Saturdays, and it results in thousands of stone buildings providing free knowledge to millions of people across generations.
It really emphasizes how one seemingly small act of mentorship or generosity can echo through history. You never know what kind of chain reaction you're starting.
It's a beautiful legacy.
Yep.
But, we do have to reconcile the boy reading poetry in the library with the man who built a $350 billion empire.
Right. We have to seamlessly link that intellectual foundation to the sheer business genius he had. So let's pivot into the actual business architecture. Let's talk about his masterclass strategy: vertical integration.
This was his ultimate weapon.
Now, I know our listeners are sophisticated. We all know the modern examples of vertical integration.
Like Amazon or Apple.
Exactly. Like Apple not just making the iPhone, but designing the microchips, creating the software, running the retail stores. You control the destiny of the product.
Right.
But applying that concept to 1880s heavy industry, that is an entirely different beast. Carnegie didn't just make steel. He bought iron ore mines, coal mines, railroads, and ports. End-to-end control.
And what's fascinating here is why this was so revolutionary at the time. To understand his genius, you have to look at the chaos of the traditional 19th century supply chain.
Break that down for us.
Before Carnegie, if you owned a steel mill, you were totally at the mercy of independent operators. You had to buy iron ore from some mining company in the Great Lakes.
Okay.
Then you had to pay an independent shipping magnate to move it across the water. Then you had to pay a hostile railroad baron to transport it to Pittsburgh. And you had to buy coal from another independent mine.
So at every single one of those steps, there's a middleman.
Yes.
And every middleman is taking a cut. They're all extracting a profit margin before you even start making the steel.
Exactly. And you have zero control over the reliability. If the railroad doubles its freight rates overnight, your profit is gone.
Or if the coal mine sends you bad fuel, your steel is brittle.
Right, and your reputation is ruined. So Carnegie looked at that system and realized it was fundamentally flawed. He didn't just want to negotiate better contracts. He wanted total sovereignty.
So he just buys the suppliers.
He buys massive tracts of the Mesabi iron ore range. He buys a fleet of ships. He literally built his own railroad, the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad, just to transport his own raw materials.
He essentially internalizes the entire market. He eliminates all the friction and all the external margins. But owning the supply chain is just the first step. The sources show that what he actually did with that pipeline is what broke his competitors.
Oh, his cost accounting. It was obsessive.
Right. Let's talk about how he tracked costs.
So in the 1870s and 80s, most manufacturers used incredibly basic accounting. They looked at their expenses at the end of the year, looked at their revenue, and if there was money left, they assumed they were fine.
Just flying totally blind.
They had no idea which parts of their process were bleeding cash. But Carnegie implemented this rigorous double-entry bookkeeping system.
Down to the penny, right?
Down to a fraction of a penny. He weighed every ton of ore, every pound of coal, every hour of labor. He demanded daily reports from his managers. He knew exactly what it cost to produce 1 ton of steel at any given moment.
And because he controlled the whole pipeline, he could spot inefficiencies that his rivals couldn't even see. And the result is wild. He was producing steel 30 to 40% cheaper than anyone else.
And we really need to pause and process how lethal that advantage is. If we are selling the exact same commodity, say steel rails, and I can make them for 40% less than you,
You're playing a completely different game.
I can lower my retail price to a point where I'm still making a profit, and you are literally losing money on every sale.
It's an industrial death sentence. He could just bleed them out. But okay, controlling the supply chain was one weapon. He had another psychological weapon up his sleeve. How he handled adversity.
Yes, Carnegie, the counter-cyclical attacker.
Right, because when the economy declined, Carnegie expanded. While everyone else retreated, he attacked.
It goes fundamentally against human psychology. Look at the panic of 1873. The railroad bubble bursts, banks fail, credit freezes, the economy just crashes into a depression.
Right, and what does 99% of the corporate world do?
They panic. They freeze hiring, halt expansion, hoard cash, and just adopt this deeply defensive posture.
Which makes logical sense. I mean, if demand falls off a cliff, you don't go build a new factory. So what does this all mean for the average person today? It goes against human nature to speed up when everyone else is hitting the brakes.
Yeah.
How do you develop that kind of nerve?
Well, the key is that Carnegie wasn't vulnerable. Because he had vertically integrated and obsessively lowered his costs, he had immense cash reserves. He had a fortress balance sheet.
Right, so he could survive a downturn.
Exactly. So while everyone else is panicking, he goes on the offensive. He builds his most advanced facility, the Edgar Thomson Steelworks, right in the middle of the Depression.
Wait, why build during a depression?
Because materials are cheap. Labor is desperately cheap because unemployment is high. And his competitors are either paralyzed by fear or going bankrupt. So he buys them up for pennies on the dollar.
Oh, wow.
It's a lesson in building a fortress before the storm hits. He uses the crash as a massive discount event to buy market share.
So when the economy recovers, he emerges with larger facilities and decimated competition. Just brilliant. And all this aggressive expansion, cost-cutting, and empire building culminated in an unimaginably massive fortune.
$350 billion.
But what happens when you win the ultimate game of capitalism? This brings us to the gospel of wealth, the great debate.
Yeah, this is where Carnegie diverges sharply from his Gilded Age contemporaries.
Mm-hmm.
In 1889, he writes this essay, The Gospel of Wealth.
And this wasn't just a casual philanthropic statement. He argued that wealthy individuals have a moral responsibility to use their fortunes to benefit society, not to hoard it and not to pass it to their heirs.
Right. He literally wrote, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced."
This raises an important question, right? At the absolute height of the Gilded Age, the richest man alive is arguing against dynastic wealth.
It's a profound philosophical shift. He donated over 90% of his wealth. The libraries, universities like Carnegie Mellon, concert halls, peace foundations.
But we need to look at the debate around this impartially, based on the text, because there is a serious tension here. Is it better for society if the government taxes and distributes wealth, or if an obsessive, hyper-efficient industrialist accumulates it all and then acts as a mega-philanthropist?
Right. The defenders of his model argue that capital is most effective when it's concentrated in the hands of a proven visionary. Carnegie believed he could administer that wealth far more efficiently than a government bureaucracy ever could.
I mean, if the state had taxed him heavily in the 1880s, would they have systematically built 2,500 libraries across the world?
Probably not.
And he didn't believe in direct charity, which he felt enabled dependency. He wanted to build ladders. A library is a tool for self-improvement.
Exactly. But the critique of this model is just as strong. The counter-argument asks, how was that wealth accumulated in the first place?
Right, by driving down costs.
Which meant driving down the wages of the men working 12-hour shifts in front of molten steel.
So the critics ask, if you have enough money to give away hundreds of millions later, couldn't you have afforded to pay higher wages and create safer conditions for your workers in real time?
It's the tension between systematic justice during the creation of wealth versus grand charity after the fact.
Yeah.
It's the exact same debate we have today about modern billionaires and the giving pledge.
And it takes serious audacity to believe you know best how to give away that much money. But whether you agree with his methods or not, he laid the ideological groundwork for modern mega-philanthropy.
He absolutely changed the cultural expectation of the ultra-wealthy.
So to summarize this incredible journey, we started with a displaced 12-year-old immigrant earning $1.20 a week. We watched him learn the whole system as a sponge, find a mentor, take massive risks, and eventually vertically integrate an entire industry.
Relentless learning combined with relentless action.
Exactly. Regardless of your background, that dictates your future. But before we sign off, there's a final, lingering question we haven't explicitly debated, and I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought.
Yeah, this goes back to his belief about inheritance. Carnegie believed leaving massive wealth to your children was harmful to their character. He didn't want to hand down a finished empire.
Right. Look at your own life. We spend so much time trying to smooth the path for the next generation, right? Trying to shield them from hardships, whether it's money or skills or struggle.
But look at Carnegie. His vision, his resilience, his greatness. It was all forged in the extreme friction of his early struggle. The poverty, the disruption.
So by constantly striving to hand the next generation a finished, comfortable empire, do we actually rob them of the friction they need to experience their own Carnegie transformation?
Is struggling to build something from the ground up actually the greatest gift you can experience?
It's a provocative thought, something to definitely mull over on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep digging into the sources, and we'll see you next time.
So friends, that was the complete breakdown. Make sure to take a screenshot of this growth gift, this infographic, so this lesson stay with you. If you want to learn from legends every single day, join our community. I am Amin. Always remember, read more, think deeper. Let me know in the comments who we should cover next. See you in next episode.